I'm Richard Dodd, and you're listening to the Ecology Academy podcast. This is a show where we get to talk and learn about all things ecological, including interviews with top ecologists, both employers and employees, those working with ecologists, and also aspiring and inspiring career-seeking individuals setting out to make a difference. The show aims to provide you with insights, advice, and inspiration to help you succeed and excel as an effective ecologist and to make a real difference to our natural environment. Today I'm talking with yet another one of my colleagues, Misho Baxendale, on the Ecology Academy podcast. Now, Misho is a dual qualified environmental consultant working across both ecology and arboricultural disciplines at Wildwood Ecology based in Stroud. So, Misho, welcome to the Ecology Academy podcast.
Yeah, great to be here.
Excellent. So, we're going to go into a little bit about yourself and also what we mean by dual qualified environmental consultant as well. So we'll have a look about that. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of your career to date.
Yeah, so it's, I guess, a somewhat interesting one because it doesn't follow that standard sort of path that you'd see. Obviously, I started out really as a volunteer with sort of local conservation charities. That's how I got into the industry of ecology. Mostly with sort of local environmental charity, local back group and the local wildlife trust. That's obviously what led me to realise I want to do this as a potential career and got into my degree.
And where we talk about local back group, where are we talking about?
Gloucestershire. So yeah, okay. Gloucestershire back group and also with the caving group there, and that's where I discovered my love of bats. So I think that's really what sort of sparked it off, was actually seeing some bats in real life and realising these aren't just some kind of make-believe thing. They're a real animal, and there's conservation work needed to sort of to make sure they're doing well. So from there, obviously, went to university, did a degree in Liverpool in environment and environmental science, and then my first sort of position was a sort of very standard field assistant ecologist. And that was fairly standard, I suppose, but it's from that point on where I had the opportunity to train up in the field of arboriculture, where I guess my path sort of deviated. Mm-hmm. So that was primarily as I was trained to be a consultant. I was asked that the role for arboriculture was open, and they were interested to see whether ecologists could potentially train up into that field. I suppose it might be worth touching on what actually is the sort of role of arboriculture compared to ecology.
Well, actually, before I'd like to go even further back. Mm-hmm. Right. So, in terms of your choice of degree at Liverpool University, then. Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned what was the degree again? Sorry, it was in.
I believe it was environmental science.
Environmental science.
Environmental science and ecology.
So, why did you choose that degree over any other? And also, I mean, if you don't mind, Liverpool University itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, originally I was actually looking at potentially doing graphic design.
Yeah.
But I felt like that wasn't something I necessarily needed a degree to do. I could build up a portfolio in my own time. So I felt like ecology sounded interesting. There was field work involved. Liverpool University they got a strong tie with the marine biology and conservation side of it as well. So they have like a research vessel that we could go out on a few research trips, and it just seemed like an interesting degree. So that's sort of why I went down that path.
And it was a full 3 years there. Did you do a placement year or anything like that?
No, yeah, three years there. I suppose instead of doing a placement year, what I was doing was that sort of volunteer work with like the local back group. Luckily, I knew that the main thing that employers would be looking for going into it is things like your licenses for protected species. Mm-hmm. So I had already started working on my bat license, keeping a log of what I'd been doing with the local back group.
Okay, yeah. So that was something you were doing at university. So were you into bats before you went to university, or was it something that?
Yeah. So that I'd already been volunteering with the local back group.
Okay, so it was before.
Yeah, before I joined university. So that's something I carried on doing in my spare time. And then I did some work during sort of summer job, setting up reptile fencing for a local company. And that's where I realised that I wanted to make sure I did well in the degree, so I didn't have to spend every day putting up reptile fences.
Well, this is the reason why I sort of draw it out. Really, that we will just say we went to university and then we did this. We're actually, what sort may set some people up, not leading you in your questioning here, but is that what you did either before, during, or at the time when you're just about to leave university, is those things that preempt, okay, what sort of career direction you're going into that. So you've got the, you know that you need maybe a bat license. You're interested in bats themselves. You're volunteering and at the same time. So you said about the field assistant role then, when you first. How long was it after you left university? Did you get that position? Was it set up at the time so you knew you were going straight into a job, or?
No, that took quite a while. I think that's something to not be ashamed of if that's what happens, because that definitely happened to me. I think that was a good probably 6 months or so, where I was trying to find positions. Unfortunately, when I sort of finished university, obviously the sort of into sort of September time, survey season was winding down. There weren't any openings. So what I did was, that's when I joined the Wildlife Trust and helped sort of volunteer with their reserve team. So I had something that I was going out to do a few days a week, something more I could put on my CV. And one of the other things I did was I found a company who were doing basic training, sort of training sessions on some of the topics that I knew would potentially be important to a new employer, because obviously I had the scientific side of things. I'd written scientific papers, I'd done research, I'd done field work at university, but I hadn't done the specific field work required for consultancy. So I found a consultancy who were providing that training to learn how to do things like phase 1 habitat survey, dormouse surveys, got some training in doing GIS. So the money that I'd saved up from that summer job, I put towards about 3 or 4 training courses. So I had that on my CV that I knew how to do a phase 1, I knew how to do dormouse surveys, and I believe the other one was Great Crested Newt surveys.
Right.
So I did a 2-day training course on Great Crested Newt surveys, and then from that, the person who did the training was able to sign off on those 2 days worth of training I'd done, and obviously that then meant I could take that forward towards a license once I started in the position.
Okay, so therefore you sort out these courses, yourself. So it's being that. So what we mention quite a lot on these podcasts is that seeking out, so being proactive and going out and getting obviously you knew that you'd need that experience or sort of the information on your CV in order to so it's building that portfolio up, as you say.
And I suppose it was easy for me because I had inside knowledge in terms of people had told me what was needed for ecology, but you could very equally just go look at some websites for the companies you're potentially applying for, and look at the kind of surveys they offer. For example, if it says they're offering phase 1 habitat surveys and newt surveys, then or whatever surveys it is in the consultancy you're looking to potentially join, then seeking out, if not training courses, then at least maybe the information might even be available online. Phase 1 habitat survey, all you need to do is read through the JNCC habitat guide book itself, and you could potentially sort of, even if you don't have the training course, you could say to your employer, well, I've studied this and I understand these parts of the methodology that I know you use.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely great because it's something that people say, I can't find a course, or I haven't got the experience. How can I get this job if I haven't got the experience? And people forget they can learn themselves. From as an employer's point of view, something what's great is that someone who can demonstrate to me that they have gone out and learnt the skills themselves. They show that passion and understanding and want the job more than anyone. Maybe if a CV came across my desk where they'd said they had some experience of phase 1, which just tended to be at university, that's fine. But I know that at university it's probably just limited to one maybe session. Yeah. Whereas great. So I interrupted your flow about the dual role. So you mentioned you got a field assistant role, and then moving into that that little bit of ARB work. So what prompted the not move but maybe transition between the two, or augmentation between the two? Yeah,
exactly. So obviously for the ecology work, that was primarily at that point I've been doing phase 1 work and sort of some protected species surveys, bat surveys, reptile surveys, the sort of thing that you start doing as an assistant. But I think perhaps what my employer at the time recognised was obviously that passion for bats, and in relation to that was trees. So obviously bats and trees that's a key sort of habitat for them. And from that, I suppose it was the fact that arboricultural consultancy is a sort of, I guess, an adjacent field to ecology, but one which is a bit more specialised, specifically on trees, woodlands, hedgerows, everything to do with that. So that's obviously where the term arboriculture comes from, is the care and management of trees. So arboriculture. And that's potentially, I guess, one interesting thing that's worth mentioning is that difference between arboriculturist and an arborist.
Oh yes.
So you've got an arboriculturalist, someone who is more involved in the management, surveying, understanding the health and well-being of trees. It could be anything from a sort of tree climbing, a sort of maintenance of trees, but also sort of preservation, conservation, maybe even so what I was looking to sort of be trained into is the planning side of trees, because there's quite a few laws and sort of planning policies surrounding trees that are quite specific. Whereas a sort of arborist is someone who typically would be more involved just in the direct maintenance, tree felling, pruning, that kind of work. Whereas an arboriculturist is looking at the whole sort of system of caring for, maintenance, and even planning around trees. So, given it seems like quite a narrow focus. Just all you do is trees, but the more you delve into it, the more you realise it's quite a specialised, deep set of knowledge that someone potentially needs to sort of help manage our sort of trees and woodlands. And I think what they were looking for is someone who not only knows enough about trees and the sort of planning side of things, but someone who's can be an advocate for trees, because I think that's something that we clearly need more trees in our urban environment, and we need to manage and maintain the trees we already have. Yeah. So that's where I suppose the interest in that role came from, is that sounded like something that I'd be interested in, because it was really involved in sort of, there was the bat side of thing, and bats need trees, and then we as humans also need trees. So the sort of role of arboriculture seemed like an interesting sort of direction to go in.
So okay, so it's a direction that you identified yourself then, in terms of, it wasn't something that you were directed towards, or you may have been directed towards, but also you obviously it's an interest as well.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of the two. I think if my employer hadn't said we have an opening for an assistant arboriculturalist, would you be interested in training? I don't think I would have realised it was even an industry or a field of work. Obviously, most people going into arboriculture will have started out with a sort of forestry degree, perhaps, or maybe even a diploma, and then they often start out in that sort of direct tree maintenance and then work their way towards consultancy. Whereas I guess where it's interesting is I've sort of come at it from the opposite direction. I already was working in consultancy with a environmental degree, not directly forest related, but obviously some of the modules were on trees and forests and woodland. And then once in that industry, I then discovered it as a sort of pathway to come to. So I've sort of come at the arboriculture industry from the sort of other side of it, which is already being involved in the consultancy side. So I think that's probably one of the key things, is just potentially even just making people aware that arboriculture is a profession, one which is really quite highly sought after, because there's not many people with that expertise on trees. And we can get into it a bit late in more detail when we talk about what sort of skills you need, but there's some very sort of highly specialised skills that sort of goes a bit above and beyond what I was really working on in terms of ecology.
So in terms of, absolutely right, we'll talk about skills very shortly. In terms of just going back, well, not go back, but in terms of the difference between academic qualifications and maybe professional qualifications. So in terms of, we know in terms of an ecologist, there's technically no academic qualification you need. People say you need a degree, but you don't have to have a degree to be an ecologist. But are there any academic or certainly, we'll go with academic. Are there any academic qualifications you need to be an arboriculturist?
So that was perhaps, I'd say, I guess we'll touch on this as well later as well, is it coming into it from this sort of dual discipline, starting out as an ecologist, getting into arboriculture, it was a bit difficult because I didn't have that the knowledge from, for example, a forestry degree.
Yeah.
So, like you said, obviously you don't need that degree to necessarily carry out the work we do, but it's kind of that sort of 50-meter swimming badge. If you have the degree, then your employer looks at that and knows, well, then they've clearly done this sort of scientific study, they've perhaps written scientific papers. So even though it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good ecologist, it evidences that you've been through that process. And so I had to try and replicate that without having had the degree initially. So in terms of arboriculture, obviously, in order to sort of join the Arboricultural Association, so that's the equivalent of sort of the Chartered Institute for Ecologists and Environmental Managers, so SIEN. What I initially was looking at was what were their joining requirements, because that's typically the way that you show that you have professional sort of membership. And the one thing I've discovered very quickly was if you have a forestry related degree or that sort of degree or diploma, it's quite simple to get into the Arboriculture Association. They do allow you to join the Arboriculture Association with a related degree, and I found on the list is one of the related degrees is anything to do with ecology.
Okay.
However, what you needed to do was I needed 3 years worth of experience to go alongside my application in order to join. So it was that tricky. The first 3 years were in that tricky situation where, in order to be professionally doing the work, ideally you needed to have the professional membership. But in order to get the professional membership, they said I needed 3 years worth of experience because I had a related degree, not a direct forestry degree. So if you go on, I'd say if you're interested in arboriculture, the first thing I'd do is have a look on the Arboriculture Association website and have a look at the membership section in terms of what the requirements are. There's various levels of diploma that you can do, which don't necessarily require you to go to the university, and obviously the degrees as well, to various levels. But I would say just because you haven't gone through that sort of forestry and arboriculture specific sort of degree pathway doesn't mean you're closed off.
There's no exclusions.
No,
there.
Definitely not. As long as you can evidence that you have that scientific understanding and you potentially might need to undertake some additional training. So what I did was the first few things that I did was go on some training courses externally again. That were sort of paid for by my employer, things like BS 5837, so the British Standard 5837 tree surveying. That's typically what's often carried out for planning. So I went to do a training course on that, training course on winter tree ID. Those sorts of things are things that you could then use to evidence your breadth of understanding in the field.
Okay, so that's great. So in terms of then the maybe professional qualifications, I mean, for an arborist, I imagine it's the chainsaw ticket and things like that, pruning saws, but are there any sort of professional sort of qualifications you need to maybe undertake these tree surveys then?
So that's the thing. That's, I guess, where the distinction comes in between the arborist who's going to be on the ground, caring directly for the trees, undertaking pruning works, maybe even climbing work. If you were looking into that profession, you may need things like chainsaw licenses and that sort of thing. But as an arboriculturalist, where you're looking more at the planning side of things, that's not necessarily required. I don't have a chainsaw license, so what I'm primarily there to do is to undertake the surveys, identify which trees are of highest value or potentially need works undertaken, and then that's when it gets handed over to the arborist who's going to be actually on the ground undertaking the work. So in terms of the professional sort of certifications that you need, really the main one is potentially having undertaken, like I said, a sort of training course in tree surveys. And I guess the main one which I'm working towards myself at the moment is your professional tree inspection certificate. So that's the PTI. That's a sort of 3-stage sort of certificate which shows your understanding of trees and their biomechanics and undertaking tree hazard and inspection surveys. That very much starts out at BTI, so that's the basic tree inspection. That's something I've done fairly recently, and then onto your intermediate tree inspection course, the ITI. They're generally run about once or twice, a couple of times a year with the Arbor Association, and there's a few other companies that run those courses. That's really the sort of thing that you want to be aiming for, to show your sort of professional understanding and qualification in undertaking sort of tree inspections. But for the sort of tree surveys that I would be undertaking day to day to inform planning applications and things like that, there's no real sort of, it's not like you need a bat license or something like that. Mm-hmm. All you need to do is prove that you've got an understanding of the British Standard 5837. You've got an understanding of trees, their health, the different species. So I'd say that there's not so much a specific sort of qualification required there.
Okay, so, I mean, it was. I remember obviously you worked with Wildwood Ecology for a few months now, coming up towards
about 6 or 7 months, I think.
Yeah. So and I remember when you first arrived, it was like a list of. I mean, when you were going for these qualifications, sorry, the PTI itself. I mean, the list of, well, first of all, reference books. There's quite a few there.
I think it's about 20 books you need to have read for the PTI, and then it's there's a couple of days worth of training course you have to undertake with assessments, looking at everything from your identification of trees, hazard assessment work, and then fungal ID. It's really quite an in-depth assessment to get that PTI. So if you're looking to potentially go into the field of arboriculture, I'd say looking at professional tree inspection and what's required to sort of build up towards that's definitely a good goal. It would be like the equivalent of getting a bat license as an ecologist, I think.
Because it's, I mean, you mentioned there about you don't technically need these qualifications at all, but so why did you go for it then? So it's something you don't need, but yet it's something that you've worked towards. And you say it's about the equivalent of a bat license. So what does it give you, or what does it give maybe the employer, or maybe even the clients? What is it? What sort of advantage does it give those three parties?
I think it's very much, like I said, the sort of good example I've heard is the 50-metre swimming badge. You may be able to swim very well, but if you don't have a 50-metre swimming badge and someone needs to know whether or not you can swim, you're going to have to prove you can swim. Yeah. If you've got the badge, it proves someone has certified that you are able to swim. And I think it's a very similar situation where, especially as an ecologist, I felt like there was a real need to show that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to the field of arboriculture. And so I think it's really in that instance, it's ensuring that there is a level of professionalism that you are undertaking. The PTI in particular is mostly directed towards the sort of tree hazard assessment side of things, and that's where you can start to get into the very legal side of tree work, the potential hazards that they can pose to human health is, on the whole, is very low. When you look at the statistics, trees across the UK are they are not involved in that many fatalities compared to a lot of other potential sources of hazard, but they are when it does happen, it's quite a visible event, and people are worried about that. And if you're undertaking tree hazard surveys, that's where your professional tree inspection certificate or your intermediate tree inspection certificate really comes into play to show that you have had some kind of professional training, and that you are undertaking this work in a professional manner, and that you've had the relevant training.
So I think it's both from professionalism, but also competency. So either you're demonstrating competency. First of all, I mean, to yourself, that you reach a particular level, so it's a sense of achievement there, but also competency to maybe your employer, and certainly to if you are marketing any of these services, to demonstrate to clients that you've reached a certain level. I think it gives you that confidence to the buyer, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so in terms of, we touched about skills there, so we talked about right at the start, towards the start of the conversation. So let's look at the skills as an ecologist and also an arboriculturist. I can never get that word right. No, but are there skills that are both complementary, and are there sort of distinct skills between the two as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting topic, and for anyone who's potentially looking to go into it, that's the thing that you'd be wanting to know. And that's definitely what I was wanting to know when the opportunity was given to me was, well, what am I going to have to learn, and what from what I've already learned could be cross-transferable. I think obviously if we're starting out with, let's assume you're an ecologist listening to this, it's fairly likely.
Yeah.
You and the sort of skills that you've already got are most likely going to be sort of field work, sort of writing scientific reports and sort of documentation of that field work you've been undertaking, and species ID. Those are probably the three that are the most cross-transferable and applicable to an initial sort of arboricultural assistant level. Mm-hmm. What you're really going to be looking for is tree species identification, potentially fungal identification, so identifying different species of fungi, and undertaking sort of reliable survey data. So it's that whole scientific method of, it's not just a scattergun approach. When you get to site, you need to be very methodical when it comes to undertaking tree surveys. There's quite a lot of data that needs to be collected for each individual tree or groups of trees and woodlands, everything from the species, the diameter of the stem, the crown spread, which is sort of measured using a laser measure, and then going into the sort of various categorizations into the physiological and structural condition of that tree. I think it really suits someone who enjoys or is good at that kind of scientific and methodical approach of making sure you collect all the correct data and then transferring that into the decision-making process that's being done back in the office. So in terms of the transferable skills, the main one really would be just identification of trees. And I think this is something that I, when I first got into it, thought, oh, well, I know trees. Yeah. I'm an ecologist. I know all our native trees. And I very quickly realised that as an arboriculturalist, you need to know a lot more than just our native trees. You suddenly start needing to know a lot of potential ornamental trees involved in forestry, trees that frankly don't even know how they, you're starting to wonder why someone planted that particular tree in that particular place. But that's the one thing I think there is a significant jump, is the identification of trees is, well, quite clearly, as an arboriculturalist and as someone involved in tree surveys, you need to be very good at. Yeah. However, I'd also say that it's something that shouldn't put you off. Just because an arboriculturist who's been doing this for 10 years might be able to identify a tree at 20 paces just from looking at the sort of shape of the crown and the bark colour and the seeds. For you, if you're starting out, and I very much when I was starting out, you might have to stop, take samples, look at your ID guides, looking at the exact shape of the buds and the leaves, and especially in the winter it starts getting difficult. But don't let that put you off. It's a skill that you can build up over time. So those, I'd say, are the sort of transferable skills at that beginning stage. Is the field work you're already undertaking it puts you in good stead to show I can carry out field surveys and I can collect good data. That's really what I'd be looking for in a new arboriculturalist, is someone who is methodical, able to carry out that survey work and bring back the data that we need to do our job. In terms of the skill that's non-transferable and is something that I had to learn, it was AutoCAD. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is the big one, which I think is a potential hurdle, and if you're interested in getting into the sort of profession, it's something that more and more these days I think is a requirement, even at quite a low level in arboriculture, at least in terms of the British Standard 5837 and planning in particular. Obviously for other sort of arboricultural roles this may not be relevant, but in the role that I've been undertaking, you'll be preparing tree constraint plans and plans involving retention and protection of trees, and that's often involving plans from architects, drainage teams, and almost all of them, as a fairly common industry standard, work in CAD, which is obviously computer-aided design software. This is both the future and the present focus of arboriculture in planning, and producing those plans and being able to work in CAD is a skill that I think you will need, and I would say it's a difficult one because like as much as I said for the other skills where, for example, phase 1 habitat surveys, you can just go find the documentation and read it. AutoCAD is an expensive piece of software. The full professional license that we use runs into thousands of pounds for a license. So I can't in good conscience sit here and say just go buy yourself an AutoCAD license and away you go. But potentially I would say that's the sort of skill which perhaps if you're already working in GIS, so QGIS perhaps for your sort of phase 1 habitat mapping and surveys for that, that's where I'd say there's a cross-transferable skill there. Even if you're not working directly in AutoCAD, you could prove competence in that sort of IT skill and sort of software. Potentially, the one thing that definitely is free online is there's a lot of information out there on how to use AutoCAD online on sources like YouTube, blogs, various websites. So even if you don't have the direct experience of working in CAD, you could at least potentially do some kind of online courses or look into the sort of skills of what's required to use the program. But most of it was learnt on the job, I'd say. It was learnt on the job, making those plans, working with drainage plans that have been provided to you. So that's really the sort of skills that I'd be looking for, is someone who's methodical, able to carry out good surveys, tree species identification, obviously that's the big one, and then general IT and potentially some kind of CAD or GIS experience, really.
Okay, so I mean, so there's quite a few different skills. Say some of those crossover, and some, I mean, complement each other, augment each other themselves. So, but I also think maybe one thing that perhaps is missing from that skill set is about, I suppose, first of all, self-awareness. Knowing what you don't know, and
exactly.
By putting in a plan to actually get there. But equally so, the drive behind getting to that stage. So having the sort of, talk about the proactiveness of, when you started, well, even before you went to university, at university, during the time you were 6 months leading up to that first role in doing the field work. But also having the end in mind. So this is what I want to achieve. How do I get there? And working backwards. So that's a skill to actually look at. Okay, well, that's what I want to achieve. But how do I get to that stage? And I think that's. I mean, I think we do ourselves a disservice. That actually is a really good skill to have. That having that drive behind you. So not expecting things to come to you, but actually you going after it. And things changing. So and let's look at the end product. We may have missed. I'm sure we missed a lot of skills out here. But the end product, the report itself, the plan itself. So there's a lot of data capture. You're using IT there to actually do that. So the programs you mentioned, AutoCAD. In terms of, I suppose, yes, looking at the product we give to a client, the reason why we're doing a survey. I mean, what does that look like in terms of its presentation, and also the, can anyone pick up a form anywhere to just put the data in and produce a report?
Yeah, so I think that's obviously, once you sort of identify those starting skills and potentially even sort of starting to work in the field of arboriculture, that's obviously the main thing. Is much like an ecology. At the end of the day, the reason we're doing it, the reason why we might be passionate and have that drive and the skill to undertake this work is because we care about the field we're in. So whether it's bats or trees, or, that's at the end of the day one of the main things we're there to be, is an advocate for these organisms or habitats which are important and require protection. So I'd say the sort of first output that we produce is I think it's quite an intangible one, is being that sort of voice of advice. You may have someone who they're most likely a layperson. They aren't aware of how important their trees might be, or how safe they are, or just they may have the best intentions of wanting to keep these trees, but don't know how to do so safely, and to ensure that if they're, for example, going through planning, what they need to get successfully through planning. So I think that's the first sort of product that we provide is, it's in the title, arboricultural consultant or ecological consultant. We're there to consult. and provide advice. In terms of then the sort of physical products, obviously we're producing, typically in terms of planning, it's an arboricultural impact assessment. So that's a report that is submitted alongside a planning application and will set out what the sort of value of the trees are that are on a site or within an area, which of them are suitable to be retained, which perhaps aren't suitable to be retained, perhaps they're dead or dying, or if they are, how could they be retained as, for example, standing deadwood habitat safely. That initially is a sort of issued as a sort of baseline tree constraints plan and survey schedule, and that's typically the form that you see with all the data tabulated. And that is really the reason we produce that is to inform the design or ongoing process of a application plan or development project, showing the root protection areas, the crown spreads, which trees are of higher value and which trees are of lower value. It's a lot. You're right. It's a very information dense product that is provided, and so that again, I think, is a skill that is really needed in the sort of arboricultural consultancy side of things, is being able to speak to your client and engage with them to make sure that they get out of it what they need. At the end of the day, that's what you're there for, is that liaison, that in between the raw data and the end product. You're there to help them understand what their constraints are, what their opportunities are. And then obviously once you've gone sort of through that process, that's when you get the final piece of work, which is that report that hopefully sets out how they can undertake their application or their plan successfully while sort of retaining trees or even adding additional trees to the area they're working in.
And I imagine, does it your ability and your skills there, because you are dual qualified, shall we say, in terms of both the eco and arb, does that assist in terms of you can see things in a different way than
Definitely. I think one of the biggest issues I've run into is, despite how closely related these two disciplines are, ecology and arboriculture, it's funny how sort of separated they can be at times. And quite typically, the one that I came across the most is, for example, the trees that an arboriculturalist might be saying are of the lowest value, or maybe even can't be retained within a development or an application, are the trees that we as ecologists are saying are brilliant for bats or dead wood habitat for saprophytic invertebrates. And so that's, I think, where I could add a lot of value to both the client's experience but also the product that we can provide, was being able to sit there with the two hats on, as it were, and to look at a tree and go, okay, as an arboriculturist, I have to say that this tree is in failing condition. It's in a state where if you were to, for example, build nearby, it may pose a significant hazard to human health, and that's something that needs to be considered. But on the other hand, I can also see it from an ecological perspective of that tree is a brilliant potential habitat for which there are certain species that we have which are reliant on that habitat. And that's then a case of where you can now that you have those two sides to the same coin, that's where you can go to whoever is the ultimate decision maker and say to them, this is the situation. We have a tree that, on the one hand, I'm saying may need to be removed, but on the other hand is very important for ecology. What are the options here? And sometimes it's just a case of the fact that, well, yes, that tree is unsuitable to be retained as a living tree, but perhaps with some minor pruning work, or just by ensuring there's a suitable buffer from it where people aren't going to be walking nearby it, perhaps that tree can just be retained in situ. And this is the thing, a lot of trees, as they're in the declining stages of their life cycle, that's a thing that trees naturally do. And I think as we as a society do need to some degree learn to sort of live with that again, with the fact that trees are a living organism, and trees and woodlands, for example, the hazard they pose can sometimes be sort of overstated, and there's a lot of species that we have which really do rely on those sorts of features on trees, and we are starting to move away from a kind of a very sort of manicured approach, that sort of trees that look perfect. We are hopefully starting to get to a point where even members of the public are recognising that that's not necessarily a natural or even best way to to be managing these habitats.
Okay, great. And no, I totally agree. I mean, I think that's having a look at I think that your skills as both, as I say, looking at it from two different, with those two hats on, as you mentioned, I think really helps. And having not just a single outcome in mind. Mm-hmm. So as an ecologist, we have, we need to protect the species. Rather than arboriculturist is looking at, what's the health and cultural value of this tree. Whereas from a planning consultant and client's point of view, completely different outcomes. They exactly. they want to get their building and the development completed. So I think there can be a very much a obviously this collaboration between all the parties, and hopefully some successful outcomes which neither party may have thought of at the start if people engage with that. So that's really good. So in terms of then, you mentioned about obviously the health and safety of trees. Now, we didn't fully talk about obviously the methodology, and that we'll save that for another day. But the use of, in terms of your assessment, we're talking about, we've got quite a few ropes in the office. So we're talking about, a lot of, we're looking at trees from the ground-based, as an ecologist, we tend to do a lot of ground-based assessments. But maybe, there's a lot of ropes here. So obviously you're doing aerial climbing too.
Yeah, so this is a skill which I'd say when we were looking at, you said what sort of skills is an arb/ecologist or an ecologist looking to get into arboriculture, or just someone looking to get into arboriculture as their primary discipline, those skills that I was discussing initially to start that sort of process of work. Into your sort of mid-career and later career, or potentially even early on if this is something you were interested in, there is a whole other sort of side to this, which is, like you said, tree climbing. And this is where it's interesting because obviously I came into this from the consultancy and sort of professional scientific side, whereas a lot of people may come into arboriculture from the sort of undertaking tree pruning and tree management work, a role which is equally important because at the end of the day they are the ones who are actually in that tree making sure it's made to be safe, and are often they're the sort of public facing sort of person who most members of the public will actually interact with when it comes to their trees. So making sure that the two actually work together is really quite important. And so for me, having that sort of professional side of the sort of understanding of arboriculture, it was quite important that I also understand what it's like to actually day-to-day work in a tree. Mm-hmm. And so that's where tree climbing comes in. So this is a process that basically, we're writing a blog on it at the moment, actually, funnily enough, about why would you climb a tree? It sounds like something that perhaps you used to do as a kid just for fun. Why on earth would you pay someone to do that? The main reason is, like you said, we obviously, all this work that I've been talking about so far, the BS 5837 tree surveys, tree hazard inspections, a lot of bat surveys, they're done from the ground in what's called like a ground level tree assessment. But obviously from the ground there's only so much that you can gather in terms of data. And sometimes it gets to a point where you say we need to actually get up into that tree to inspect a feature, particularly when it comes to sort of bats or the sort of undertaking that pruning work or management that may be needed to ensure a tree is safe so it can be kept safely in the environment it's in. And so getting into the tree climbing side of things is a whole nother depth of experience that I found myself going into, and really it's another one of those sort of aspects that you could really delve very deeply into in terms of all the equipment you need, training, and there's sort of the experience that you require to do that safely and well. But starting out, essentially, it was a similar sort of process of when I found out that this is an option, that climbing trees is something that you could actually get paid to do and is actually very important as part of the role. I started to look into, what would be needed to do that. And essentially the first thing is that unlike the sort of ground level work, for the tree climbing work, there is very much a certificate required. Like you said, with the chainsaw certificate, legally there are certifications required for your aerial tree climbing and rescue. So this is something that's often provided by Lantra, and you then get a certificate from that after your training course to show that you are able to competently and safely climb a tree using correct rope and climbing techniques, that sort of thing. Once you have that, really the main reason we would be doing that, and why we're investing in that as a potential survey method, is it's the additional data that you can gather, isn't it? It's the same as why we're potentially investing in infrared cameras. The data shows that if you're able to climb a tree, you're more likely to get a good picture of what either the condition of that tree is in, or quite commonly the reason why we might be doing it, the condition of potential habitat for bats. So if you're able to climb up into a tree and get an endoscope into a feature, you're going to get a lot more data in terms of what the potential roosting feature is like. If that tree has to come down, how well can we replace that feature? And sort of sparked from that, we're looking at sort of future-proofing, improving the way that we can undertake our surveys. So we're looking at trail cameras, and hopefully going to be trialling the use of those this survey season to see how well can those be used to undertake bat surveys, sort of reducing the potential need for surveyors to be undertaking dusk and dawn surveys.
Okay, yeah. So in one way, the use of climbing, tree climbing then can actually be obviously
beneficial
to
very much
to the client. Maybe even reducing the need for certain surveys, or certainly either reducing the number of surveys, or number of surveyors, and hence the cost.
I think it's an efficiency situation. A climbing team can potentially climb several trees in a day, whereas that would have taken several surveys worth of surveyors to come at dusk or dawn survey those trees. So it's I'd say if you were a client looking at the product we can provide, being able to have someone that's able to climb a tree, inspect features, either to potentially scope them out and say actually that feature isn't suitable for bats and further surveys aren't required, or yes, surveys are required, and because of this additional information we now have, we can be more specific in the way we undertake our surveys. That's hopefully something which clients will be seeing more and more as this is used, and it already is being used. It's about not just having a fun time and climbing a tree, but potential efficiencies for your clients, and also ultimately the main reason I see for doing it is for the species themselves, for the bats or the trees, ensuring we collect good, robust, scientifically proven data. And that's just it's much easier when you're actually up in the tree itself.
Okay, so I say just touch briefly upon obviously the ability to climb a tree. I'd imagine that obviously you need the equipment, but also what about yourself in terms of your capabilities then? So I mean, can anyone climb a tree? Do you think, or is it certain mindset, but also physicality?
I'd say it's definitely not. It's not a role for everybody, and I'd say it's not necessarily something that you should. It's not like it needs to be something you have to do. Like I said, I've been working as an arboriculturalist for I think about 4 or 5 years, on top of several years of working as an ecologist before that. And up until the last year or so, tree climbing isn't something that I was doing, primarily due to it. I had enough on my plate, already focusing on all the other stuff we've been talking about. But once I sort of was getting interested in it, I would definitely say it's something. It's hard. It is very difficult. And I'm by no means an expert in it whatsoever. I'm back at that first stage of a journey of getting to a point where I hopefully one day can be an expert in this. But I'd say the main reason I sort of got into that is wanting to understand the difficulty of that work. I feel very strongly that if you're asking other people to do potentially difficult or hard work, such as nighttime dusk and dawn surveys, or physically climbing a tree with ropes, I feel like I want to understand how difficult or easy that is, so that if I'm asking somebody to do that, I understand the limitations of what they're doing. So I'd say it's definitely not. That's not a career path for everybody, and I'd say it's not something that you need to be able to do. But if it's something which does interest you, it's potentially something that is much like volunteering, working with bats. It's something that can be fun even just outside of work. It's at the end of the day, there are even sort of professional competitions in tree climbing, and it can be a whole sort of avenue of fun and, quite frankly, a good sport, even outside of work. So if it's something that interests you, such as bouldering, I'd say, if you're already rock climbing or bouldering, or maybe belaying on a rock climbing wall, these are skills which I think would definitely stand you in good stead if you were looking to join as a tree climbing ecologist or arboriculturalist. And that's where then perhaps you might have those physical sporting skills and the skills to actually undertake the climbing, where you now need to look at, well, the thing that my employer is going to need to see is that I have the skills in terms of the bat license and knowing how to inspect features for bats. So I'd say, definitely not for everybody, but
not for everyone.
If you're of that inclination, I'd say it's a potential sort of career pathway that I think, again, some people potentially even listen to this might not even be aware that that's something that they could do. They could be paid to climb trees, and I'll be very honest, I think it's a very, very highly sought after skill. I think there was recently at the Bats and Trees conference last year, they were looking at, I think the figures was something like a 30% shortfall in the number of climbers required by sort of 2023 or something like that. So it's clearly a skill in very high demand, and if it was something you were interested in, I think it's a good opportunity to be looking into at this point. And the way that the survey techniques are moving forward with potential use of trail cameras and tree climbing being more and more regularly recommended, I think if you were looking to future-proof your career and were interested in the physical fieldwork side of things, I think that would be a good niche to potentially put, to stand you in good stead for the future. Yeah,
good, sort of a commercial route, but also, career move as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so Misho, you've been very generous for your time today, and I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for coming on to the Ecology Academy podcast. Now, before we leave, though, just one final question, and that's really about either advice like you'd give someone starting out in their career, or even maybe midway through their career. So what's related to the obviously skills they need, what to focus upon, maybe some career advice, that either good advice or bad advice you've been given on a career. So sort of parting thoughts then. So about career advice for anyone coming into this career.
Yeah, so I think the unique perspective I can give is having gone through the process of becoming dual qualified. I think that's hopefully the area that I might be able to give some good sort of parting advice on is. I think if you are interested in sort of additional qualification, whether it's you're an arboriculturalist and you're interested in bats, and so you're thinking, well, maybe I could start working in ecology, or vice versa, an ecologist who's thinking, well, I really like trees, woodlands, that sort of environment. I want to see that be like a champion for this particular type of habitat. Arboriculture sounds interesting. That's something I'd never even heard of. Maybe I'd be interested in that. I think the real key thing to understand is the being sort of dual qualified brings both some very unique difficulties and also opportunities. I think the biggest of those would be your time management. I think when it comes to this sort of thing, the big opportunity you have is obviously to add a new string to your bow, a whole new potential reason for people to employ you. But also just a whole new reason to enjoy doing the work you do, and a reason to be driven. This is a whole new field. Some people think, oh, well, I'm starting out right at the bottom again. That's a difficult position to be in. But equally, that's a very freeing position to be in, where you suddenly have so many opportunities again. You may have sort of specialised in your current field, and now starting in this new field near the bottom again, you're completely open to all these opportunities. But I would say the biggest difficulty you may face is managing the amount of time you have in order to do so. And I think if you want to go down that path of having the two qualifications, being dual qualified in two disciplines, you're going to have to be very clear from the outset what your goals are and what your objectives are. Is that, for example, to focus on, for example, when I was starting out, or midway through sort of starting out in arboriculture, I had to make it very clear to my team that, for example, I wouldn't be available for as many ecology surveys, or, for example, I may not be able to undertake as much project management, because I'm having to focus on learning all these brand new skills and undertaking arboricultural surveys. And so during that time, hopefully if you've got a good supportive team, they can understand the limitations you might have, how much time you actually have. And so I think it's something that I really struggled with at the beginning. So to be honest, it's a difficult path to go down. But when you get it right, it can be very freeing and liberating to have the freedom to decide what you want to do. Do you want to do more? For example, I said, well, obviously, as I'm working with trees and arboriculture in ecology, I'm gonna focus on bats and trees. That's something I want to champion and be really good at. Obviously, that means that other things you're not going to have time for. You simply can't do. There's only so many hours you have, and in order to be good at it, you're going to have to be careful with how much time you've got. And I think my biggest piece of advice is know when to say no. I think don't be afraid to say when no, that would be too much for me to take on. Ideally, then look to have some solutions. No, but perhaps if I was to take on this part, someone else might be able to do this bit. Or no, but if someone else was to take this job off of me, then I could do that. But ultimately, I'd say there's no benefit to saying yes to absolutely everything. I think especially for someone starting out, it's very easy to fall into that trap of feeling like you have to say yes to everything, and that comes into the time management thing. Is if you say yes to everything, eventually you're going to have too much, and you're not going to be able to do it to the best of your abilities. So understanding where your limitations lie, and it may take a bit of time. It may take a while of saying yes to a lot of things and then realising, okay, that was too much. Let's rein it back. Let's get to a point at which I have a nice balance of ecology and arb, or just the ecology work, or just the arb work. And so I think that's my biggest take-home message is I wish I'd known sooner to sometimes you need to feel empowered to say no.
Just say no. There we go.
Exactly.
Yeah, there you go. No, fantastic. Well, I think that's great parting advice, and I think our audience can take a lot from that. I'm sure. I can certainly take a lot from that as well. Just wait, saying no. But for today, Misho, thank you for joining me on the Ecology Academy podcast.
Well, thanks very much.
If you enjoy our show and want to help, then please click on the subscribe button and rate us on your favourite podcast player, as that's how you can inspire ecologists in the making, help retain great talent, and provide insights of our industry to a much wider audience of why ecology really does matter. Thank you. And remember, learning is a lifelong endeavour, so stay curious, be adventurous, and build bridges for others to cross.